The horse stood at the far end of the pen like it had already accepted its fate. Dust drifted around its hooves as buyers moved past without a second look. Men gathered near the rails, talking loudly about the sleeker, stronger animals brought in earlier that morning, the ones that drew excited murmurs and raised bids. But this one, a thin bay with weary eyes and a rough coat, was left alone as if it didn't even belong there. Its ribs showed through its hide, and its mane hung uneven, like someone had cut it in a hurry. Even so, there was something in the way it held its head, something quiet and steady, almost like a memory it refused to let go of. Most folks didn't bother to see more than its worn body. They saw no promise, no future, nothing worth their time. But that was the thing about moments like these. All it took was one person to see what others didn't. The morning sun was barely over the horizon, yet heat already pressed down on the crowded yard. Wagons rolled in from every direction, their wheels crunching over dry earth. Ranchers watched with sharp eyes, scanning the horses brought in for the sale. Some were restless, pacing and tossing their heads, while others waited with calm confidence, knowing they came from strong stock. Buyers moved from pen to pen with the purpose of people who had done this for years. They judged conformation, age, muscle, even temperament from a distance. Every movement of a hoof or flick of an ear meant something. Every step a horse took could raise or lower the price before the auctioneer ever called out the first bid. Yet no one seemed to care about the bay. It stood as still as a shadow, its nose near the fence, watching people pass like it hoped for nothing. At times it shifted its weight as if its legs ached. Someone had tied a tag with a smudged number to its halter, the ink barely readable. The man who had brought it in earlier had not stayed long. He led it into the pen, dropped the rope, and walked off without a backward glance. The horse hadn't made a sound. Across the yard, a rancher and his daughter stepped down from their wagon. The man moved with the firm steps of someone who had spent most of his life outdoors, boots worn but sturdy. His daughter walked beside him, brushing dust off her skirt. She looked around with a curious eye, taking in the animals, the pens, and the crowd. She had been to plenty of sales before, but something about this one made her look closer. Maybe it was the number of horses brought in or the way the air buzzed with more tension than usual. Or maybe she just sensed something was off in the way people moved a little faster than normal, as if trying to take the best deals before someone else did. Her father had come with a purpose. He needed a strong young gelding for work on their ranch. Something sound, dependable, and good under saddle. He had a list in his pocket and a budget in his mind, both of which he planned to stick to. He scanned the pens with practiced focus, judging bone structure and posture just like the others. His daughter followed, but her gaze drifted past the animated horses, drawing all the attention. She noticed the quieter ones, the ones standing alone or being pushed aside by the more spirited animals. She had always had an eye for the overlooked, something her father both admired and worried about. As they moved deeper into the yard, dust swirled around them. Voices carried over the air, rising and falling with the rhythm of bargaining. Men spoke of bloodlines and past work, horses they had raised and ones they wished they hadn't let go. The daughter listened, but didn't say much. She wasn't the type to speak loudly in a crowd, but she took in everything. That was when she noticed the bay. It stood apart from the others, almost hiding behind the corner of the pen. At first, she thought it might be sick or injured, but then it lifted its head. Their eyes met for a brief second. Something in the horse's expression held her there. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was more like a quiet plea for someone to understand what it had been through. She stepped closer to the fence, pushing past two men who gave her a puzzled look. She didn't seem to notice. Her eyes stayed fixed on the thin bay. Her father kept walking until he realized she wasn't beside him anymore. When he turned back, he saw her standing near the neglected pen. "You don't want that one?" a man nearby said before her father could reach her. "That one's got no fire left." "Been through too much by the look of it," another chuckled. "Best to let that one go cheap." "If it goes at all," her father came up behind her, glancing at the bay. "We're not here for that kind," he said gently. "Come on now, let's keep moving." There are better choices, but she didn't move. She rested her hand on the rail, studying the horse like she was trying to read a story written on its hide. "It's been alone this whole time," she said in a quiet voice. "No one's even looked at it, because folks know what they're doing," the first man replied. "Some horses just aren't worth the trouble?" Her father didn't like the tone, but he didn't say anything to the man. He only looked at his daughter, waiting for her to step away from the pen. Instead, she leaned closer. "What happened to you?" she whispered to the horse, though she knew it couldn't answer. The bay blinked slowly, lowering its head toward her like it recognized a kind of softness in her voice that it hadn't heard in a long while. A gust of wind blew across the yard, carrying more dust, making the horse squint and shift. The daughter felt her breath tighten. She knew the pain of being ignored, of being misjudged by a glance. Something in the horse's stillness reminded her of long days when she had been looked past by people who thought they knew everything. She understood that look better than she wanted to admit. The auctioneer's voice boomed from the platform, calling everyone toward the main pen for the start of the sale. Buyers hurried over, eager to grab the best prospects before the prices climbed. Horses were led out one by one, their hooves thudding on the packed dirt, heads tossing as the crowd murmured with excitement. The rancher tugged gently on his daughter's sleeve. "We need to go," he said. "The ones we came for will be up early." She nodded, but her eyes drifted back to the bay. The horse hadn't moved. It didn't even seem to care that the sale was starting. It just waited in the same silent way it had been waiting all morning. Her father noticed her hesitation and let out a quiet sigh. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "But we can't take on every lost cause. We don't have room or time for that right now." She looked down, unsure how to explain what she felt. She didn't want to argue with him, but something inside her refused to let go of the thought of that lonely horse behind the fence. There was something about it she couldn't shake, something that tugged at her in a way none of the other horses had. As the auctioneer prepared to call out the first bid, the daughter took one last look at the thin bay. The horse's eyes followed her, steady and deep, as if trying to hold her there a moment longer. Then, just as she turned to walk toward the crowd with her father, she heard a sharp clang behind her. She spun around. The bay had pushed against the gate. The latch rattled loud enough to draw a few startled glances. Dust rose around its hooves as it stepped closer to the opening, pressing again, harder this time. Something was wrong. Something was about to happen. And the daughter knew, with a sinking feeling in her chest, that whatever came next would change everything. The clang of the gate echoed through the yard, cutting through the murmur of the crowd and even pulling a few buyers' eyes away from the main pen. The daughter stared at the bay, her pulse beating faster as she tried to understand why the horse had suddenly pushed forward. It didn't look wild or panicked. It didn't rear or toss its head like the more spirited animals often did. Instead, it leaned against the gate with a strange blend of urgency and restraint, as if it wanted to follow her but didn't know whether it was allowed to. Dust settled slowly around its legs as it stepped back once, then forward again, touching its nose to the latch. Her father followed her gaze, his brow tightening. "Must be hungry or restless," he said, though the uncertainty in his voice didn't match his words. "Come on now. We've got to get in place before the first run starts." She started toward the auction ring, but her mind stayed behind with the bay. It wasn't acting like the other neglected horses she had seen before. Usually, ones that had been through too much didn't try to draw attention. They shut themselves down, they kept to the corners. This horse wasn't doing that. It was quiet, yes, but not defeated. It looked like it was trying to tell someone it didn't belong there. Almost like it recognized danger in a way no one else did. The crowd gathered tight as the auctioneer stepped onto the platform, raising his hand for silence. The first horse was brought out, a sleek sorrel that pranced with confidence. The daughter tried to focus, tried to follow her father's steady attention on the bidding, but she felt her thoughts drifting back to the far pen. Her father made notes under his breath about the sorrel's movement, its alert ears, its good posture. She nodded at the right moments, but she wasn't listening. The bay's eyes kept surfacing in her mind, steady and deep, almost like they had hooked onto something inside her. A man standing beside them mentioned how some horses brought in that morning came from a ranch that had fallen on hard times. Another said a few were from a foreclosed property whose owner left in a hurry. Rumors drifted around like dust in the wind, hard winters, failing farms, debts that couldn't be paid. Animals caught in the middle of human struggle, that wasn't new. Life had always been like that. But hearing it now made her wonder if the bay was one of the horses swept up in someone else's troubles. Maybe it had lost more than weight. Maybe it had lost its place, its purpose. Her father didn't entertain rumors. He focused on what he could see, not what he heard. He whispered comments to himself as more horses were let out. He had an eye for good prospects and a sharp sense for value. But with each passing moment, he noticed his daughter's distant gaze. "You're still thinking about that one," he said quietly. She didn't deny it. "It's strange," she replied. It acted like it knew something was wrong. "Lots of animals act strange when they're stressed," he said. "Don't read too much into it." His words made sense, but they didn't settle her thoughts. The memory of the bay pushing against the gate stayed sharp in her mind. The bidding went on, rising and falling in a rhythm that filled the air. Buyers lifted their hands, the auctioneer's voice climbed higher, and horses went to new owners. Her father put in a few bids but held back on the ones that shot up too quickly. He was patient, he could wait for the right match. But all the while, he kept glancing at his daughter, noticing her distraction. As another horse was led away, dust swirling behind it, she finally spoke. "Do you think someone hurt that bay before it came here?" He paused before answering. "I don't know," he said. "Could be anything, but that's the thing about sales like this. We don't always know the stories behind every horse." She looked down at her hands, squeezing her fingers together. "I feel like it's trying to tell someone its story." Her father sighed, gentle but tired. "Sometimes wanting to help can blind you. Not every horse wants to be saved." She knew he wasn't trying to be harsh. He was speaking from experience. They had taken on animals before that needed more care than they expected. Some recovered. Some didn't. He carried memories of both outcomes. But the daughter couldn't shake the feeling that the bay wasn't just another sad case. There was something different in the way it moved, something that didn't fit the picture everyone else saw. The auction continued until a break was called. Folks stretched their legs, grabbed water, or huddled together to talk strategy. Her father walked off to speak with a neighbor about a promising gelding coming up soon. The daughter stayed near the edge of the yard, her eyes drifting again toward the lonely pen. The bay stood in the same spot, but now its ears were pricked forward, alert, watching her through the distance. She felt pulled to it all over again. Without overthinking it, she walked back across the yard. The closer she got, the more she noticed details she hadn't seen earlier. The horse's coat, though dull, had a faint sheen in the sunlight. Its eyes, even tired, held a depth she couldn't ignore. Its ribs showed, yes, but its stance was steady. This wasn't an animal on its last leg. This was an animal that had been let down but wasn't ready to give up. The tag on its halter swayed in the faint breeze. She leaned closer and realized the smudged number had faded almost completely, like no one bothered to rewrite it. As she stood there, a man in a worn jacket approached the pen. He had a clipboard in one hand and a frustrated look on his face. He muttered under his breath, kicking at the dirt. "Trouble with this one?" she asked carefully. He looked up, surprised someone had spoken. "Trouble?" "No," he said, though his tone didn't match his answer. "Just a horse no one wants. Came in from a mess of a place. Papers were lost. Owner didn't leave much info," he shrugged. "We just put it up and hope someone takes it. Otherwise, it'll be hauled out with the rest that don't sell." Her stomach tightened. "What does hauled out mean?" The man hesitated. "Just means we find somewhere else for them to go." "Not every horse gets a buyer?" She understood the meaning behind his careful wording. Her father always said auctions weren't kind places. They were practical, not emotional. The man walked off to check another pen, leaving her alone again with the bay. The horse stepped closer to her. Not in a rushed way, not demanding, just steady. Its muzzle reached toward the fence, and she slowly lifted her hand. The horse pressed its nose against her palm, warm and gentle. She felt its breath, the soft exhale that carried a mix of dust and something weary but hopeful. For a moment, everything else faded away. She wasn't at the auction, and she wasn't surrounded by buyers or bidding calls. It was just her and the horse standing in a quiet space that didn't belong to anyone else. She felt something shift inside her, something she didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. Then her father's voice called her name from across the yard. She stepped back, startled, turning to see him striding toward her with a firm expression. She knew that look. He had seen enough to guess what was happening in her mind. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but serious. "The horse you're looking at has no history, no papers, no guarantees. It's not what we came for." She nodded, but her heart pulled her in another direction. "I know," she whispered. "But it needs someone." "So do a lot of them," he replied. "And we can't take them all." He wasn't wrong, but the weight of his words settled heavily on her chest. She followed him back toward the main pen, but every step felt slow. Her mind kept circling the same thought. If no one else bid on the bay, it would disappear, not sold. Just taken away, taken somewhere no one talked about out loud. As the auction resumed, she tried to focus, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving something important behind. When the auctioneer finally announced the pen with the neglected horses, she straightened, her heart beating hard. Her father glanced at her, already sensing her change in posture. The bay was let out with a few other horses, each one thin or tired or overlooked. But when the bay stepped into the ring, the entire yard seemed to fall quieter. It lifted its head, ears twitching, eyes searching the crowd. And then, in a way that sent a shiver through her, it stopped scanning and stared directly at her. She felt a pull stronger than anything she had felt all morning. The auctioneer called for the first bid. No hands went up, not one. The father shifted beside her, ready to walk away, but she couldn't move. The bay kept its eyes on her, waiting like the moment in front of her held more weight than she realized. The auctioneer lifted his voice again, calling for any interest. Still no hands. The daughter felt her breath catch as she stepped forward. But before she could speak, before she could raise her hand, someone else moved behind her. A figure she hadn't noticed earlier. A figure stepping toward the bidding line. The auctioneer saw the motion and pointed. "Got one bid?" The daughter blinked, stunned. Someone else wanted the horse, someone she hadn't expected. And everything inside her tightened with new tension, new questions, and a rising fear that she might be too late. The next morning slipped in with a strange kind of quiet, the kind that made every sound sharper. At the ranch, the air felt heavier than usual, like the world itself knew that something important was shifting. The horse that everyone ignored at the sale now stood in the far corner of the corral, head lowered, ears moving every so often as if he was trying to understand this new place. He still didn't trust anyone, and no one really blamed him. A horse that had been pushed around enough times learned to keep his distance. The rancher's daughter watched him from the fence, hands tucked into her sleeves. She tried not to let the others see how much she cared, because the older ranch hands already whispered that she had brought home trouble. They said the horse didn't know how to accept a gentle hand, that he had too much fear under his skin, and that nothing good would come out of trying to fix what someone else had already broken. But she couldn't shake the memory of his eyes at the sale, the way they seemed to call out even though he never made a sound. Her father didn't say much that morning. He rarely did when he was carrying worries he didn't want to lay on her shoulders. But she knew he was thinking about the work that needed to be done, the bills that kept coming, and the long list of repairs the ranch needed long before they ever thought about bringing in another horse. Still, he didn't tell her to let the horse go. He just walked the fence line, studying the animal as though trying to decide if this choice had been fate or mistake. The horse flinched every time someone stepped near him. His muscles tightened at the smallest sound. Even a shifting breeze made him lift his head fast. The rancher's daughter spoke to him softly, choosing her words carefully. She didn't step into the corral yet. She wanted him to see that she respected his space. He wasn't like the other horses, not yet. He needed something different, something no one had ever given him before. Each hour on the ranch passed with a slow sort of tension. One ranch hand insisted the horse wasn't worth the trouble. Another said the animal's past might bring danger if anyone pushed him too hard. But the daughter didn't back away. She kept showing up at the same spot by the fence, letting the horse hear her voice at different times of day. Sometimes she brought a bucket of water with a bit of grain mixed in to show she meant no harm. She didn't expect him to come close, but she wanted him to know she wasn't going anywhere. Rumors started traveling beyond the ranch, too. Folks in town had seen the horse at the sale and remembered how nobody looked twice at him. They remembered how he stood alone in the corner, silently waiting for something nobody ever planned to give him. Some said he'd been mistreated by a previous owner. Others thought he'd grown up wild and didn't know how to trust people. The truth might have been somewhere in the middle, but whatever it was, it followed him like a shadow. The daughter spent the evening studying everything she could about horses who had been through rough pasts. She asked older ranchers what methods they used when dealing with animals that had learned fear instead of trust. Some gave advice that was too harsh for her liking. Others simply told her to be patient. But while patience came easy to her, time didn't. The ranch needed a working horse, and the longer this one remained untouched, the more the pressure grew. One evening, a strong wind blew across the open land, carrying the smell of dust and the hint of rain. The horse lifted his head toward the sky as if listening for something far away. The daughter saw him freeze when lightning flickered behind the clouds. Thunder rolled in the distance, and he shifted nervously. She realized storms might be tied to whatever memories haunted him. She stepped back from the fence so he could have space, but she didn't leave. She stayed until the wind settled, wanting him to know he wasn't facing it alone. Over the next several days, a change began, small but noticeable if someone paid attention. The horse didn't turn away so quickly when she walked near him. He started to look at her longer before stepping back. She kept her movements slow and steady. She didn't raise her hands fast or move suddenly around him. She wanted him to learn that humans didn't always mean trouble. One morning, while the sun was still low, she found the horse waiting near the fence where she usually stood. He didn't step close enough for her to reach out to him, but he didn't run either. That alone felt like progress. She spoke softly again, letting her voice carry the same calm tone. The ranch dog wandered over, curious, and even that made the horse tense. She gently sent the dog away so the horse wouldn't feel overwhelmed. But progress invited questions. Her father's old friend visited and asked if she knew what she was getting herself into. He reminded her that a horse with a troubled history could be unpredictable. He suggested maybe it was better to trade the horse to someone who handled difficult animals more often. She listened politely, but her heart didn't budge. She had seen something in the horse that no one else saw. She didn't know what it was yet, but it was enough to keep her trying. As the days passed, tension began forming in ways she didn't expect. A neighboring ranch had been struggling too, and one of its workers had an interest in the horse. He visited the ranch more than usual, offering to buy the animal. He insisted he could fix him faster, but something about his tone made the daughter uneasy. The horse would never heal in a place where someone tried to rush him. Her father turned down the offer, but the worker didn't hide his frustration. The daughter started sensing that something bigger was building around the horse, like he was at the center of a storm that hadn't shown itself yet. The horse seemed to sense it too. Sometimes he lifted his head sharply, listening to sounds no one else noticed. At night he paced along the fence, leaving tracks deep in the dirt. One late afternoon, when the sky cast long shadows across the ranch, she stepped closer than she ever had before. The horse watched her with wide eyes but didn't step away. She held out her hand at her side, not reaching for him, just letting him see that she was willing to meet him halfway. He lowered his head slightly, muscles twitching but no longer trembling the way he once did. For a moment the world felt still. But then one ranch hand accidentally dropped a metal latch near the barn, and the loud clatter sent the horse bolting to the far corner. The daughter felt her heart drop, but she didn't let discouragement settle. That night she sat with her father on the porch. They talked about the horse and the strange interest others had shown in him. Her father admitted he felt uneasy too, though he couldn't explain why. Something in the air felt unsettled, and the horse seemed to be tied to it somehow. The daughter lay awake long after everyone else had gone to bed, thinking about the horse, the neighbors, and the growing tension that seemed to follow her every step now. She wondered what she had stepped into without realizing it. She wondered what secrets the horse carried that others might know more about than she did. She closed her eyes for a moment, but her thoughts didn't settle. They only raised more questions. What if the horse's past wasn't just painful but dangerous? What if someone was trying to keep something hidden? And what if the quiet fear she saw in his eyes wasn't only from harsh treatment but from something far more serious? Just as she finally drifted toward sleep, a sound echoed outside, distant but unmistakable. A sound that didn't belong at that hour. She sat up, heart pounding, already sensing that something was about to change, and not in a simple way. The night around the ranch held its breath, as if waiting for the next step in a path she had unknowingly chosen the moment she saved the horse. She moved to the window slowly, careful not to make the floorboards creak. The ranch at night was usually quiet, the kind of quiet that let a person hear the soft rustle of grass or the distant call of an owl. But this sound had been different. It had weight to it. She listened hard, her breath held tight, and then she heard it again. A gate latch clicking from the direction of the corral. It wasn't loud, but it was too deliberate to be the wind. Her heart pulled tight as she slipped into her boots and grabbed her jacket. She didn't wake her father. She didn't want to panic anyone until she understood what was going on. The ground felt cold under her feet as she stepped outside. The lantern by the porch shook slightly in the breeze, its flames stretching thin, casting long shadows across the yard. She walked slowly toward the corral, every few steps pausing to listen again. The horse was usually restless at night, pacing or blowing softly through his nose, but tonight there was silence, a silence that made her stomach twist. When she reached the fence, she stayed low against the wooden rails. She scanned the shadows across the open area. At first she saw nothing, only the faint outline of the horse standing still in the corner. But then, near the back gate, she caught movement, a figure stepping backward, trying to stay hidden. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't a ranch hand. The build was wrong, and no one from the ranch would be sneaking around in the dark. She whispered the horse's name, just loud enough for him to know she was there. He lifted his head and looked toward her. Even in the darkness she could see the whites in his eyes. He knew something was wrong too. She stayed where she was, waiting to see if the figure would reveal itself. But it slipped away into the night, moving fast toward the outer field. She wanted to chase after it, but she stopped herself. She didn't know who was out there or what they wanted, and running blindly into the dark was the last thing she needed to do. The next morning, she told her father what she had seen. He hadn't slept much either, and admitted he thought he heard something around the same time. Together they went to check the gates. One of the latches was loose, barely hanging. Another had clearly been messed with. Someone had tried to open it, and not by accident. Her father examined the tracks on the ground. There were boot prints, but the dirt was too disturbed to tell how many. They both knew who the most likely culprit was, even if they didn't speak the name aloud. The worker from the neighboring ranch had been showing too much interest in the horse. His visits had grown more frequent. His questions had grown more pointed. Her father said they needed to be more cautious. The horse wasn't just shy or troubled. Now he was the center of something they couldn't fully understand yet. The daughter spent extra time at the corral that day. The horse ate slowly from the bucket she placed near him, still watching every movement around him. She kept talking to him, telling him he was safe, even though she didn't fully believe it herself. The wind had a sharp edge to it, and the sky felt heavy, like a storm could roll in any moment. Everything around her felt unsettled. As afternoon light faded, the tension on the ranch grew thicker. Some of the ranch hands muttered about strangers passing by on the road earlier, people they didn't recognize. Others mentioned hearing distant voices near the fields. No one liked how uncertain things felt. The daughter tried to brush it off, but she couldn't. Every time she looked at the horse, she sensed that whatever was happening was tied to his past. Later in the day, a letter arrived for her father from the neighboring ranch. It wasn't common for them to exchange letters. The neighboring rancher usually stopped by in person if he had business. But this letter was short and strangely vague, mentioning concerns about a certain animal and issues that needed to be addressed. Soon, her father folded it with a heavy expression and didn't say much about it. She noticed the way his jaw tightened, though. Something about the message unsettled him deeply. The daughter went back to the corral after dinner. She wanted to check on the horse again. When she approached, he lifted his head and took a few steps toward her, cautious but curious. It was the closest he had willingly come so far. She slowly crouched, letting her hand rest on the outside of the fence. He lowered his head slightly, the tip of his nose hovering inches above her fingers. For a split second, she thought he might actually touch her hand. But then something cracked in the distance. A branch or a boot on dry ground. The horse jerked back, ears pinned, and she spun toward the noise. Someone was watching them again. She called out, but no answer came. She thought she saw a figure near the barn, but by the time she blinked, it was gone. The horse paced in tight circles, snorting in distress. The moment between them was gone as fast as it had arrived. She hurried inside and told her father something wasn't right. He grabbed his lantern and stepped out with 2 ranch hands to check the property. They found nothing. But the unease didn't leave. If anything, it grew heavier. By the next morning, the story had spread through town. People whispered about the horse and the late-night visitor seen by one of the ranch hands who swore he spotted a stranger by the fence line. Folks talked about the daughter's determination and the neighbor who had been coming around too often. Some even mentioned hearing old rumors about illegal horse trading or stolen animals being moved through different ranches. The daughter hated hearing the talk, but at the same time, it confirmed what she already felt. The horse wasn't just another animal with a rough past. He was connected to something far bigger than she imagined when she first stepped in at the sale. That evening, clouds rolled in from the horizon, dark and low. The smell of rain settled across the ranch. She stood by the corral once again, watching the horse stand still as stone. He didn't pace this time. He just stared outward like he sensed someone coming. She tightened her jacket. The ranch hands were restless too. A few lingered near the barn, pretending to finish chores. The dog stayed close to her heels, unusually alert. Her father walked out to join her, his eyes scanning the open fields. He didn't say much, but the look he gave her said enough. They both felt the same thing. Something was building, something they could no longer ignore. Suddenly, lightning flashed across the sky. The horse reared halfway, hooves thudding against the ground. The daughter tried to calm him from a distance, but he was too shaken. Thunder followed, rolling low and deep. The ranch lights flickered. Then came another sound. Not thunder, not the wind, something else. Something that cut through the air like a warning. Her father stepped forward, lantern raised high, eyes narrowing as he stared toward the far end of the property. She followed his gaze and felt her stomach twist. There were shadows moving near the outer fence, several of them. Slow at first, then quicker as they spread out, her breath caught. The horse pressed against the far corner of the corral, trembling with fear. Whatever had been simmering was no longer trying to stay hidden. It was here, approaching, surrounding them. And the rancher's daughter realized the moment she had been trying to prepare for was no longer coming. It had arrived. The shadows moved with a purpose that made the daughter step closer to her father without even thinking about it. Rain started to fall in uneven drops, tapping on the fence and the metal sheets of the barn roof. The lantern light shook in her father's hand as a group of men finally came into view. They didn't try to hide now. Their shapes grew clearer with every step, and the daughter felt her heartbeat rise in her throat. She looked to the corral. The horse backed up again, his head high, his breath coming out in short bursts of fear. Her father whispered for her to stay behind him, but she refused to move. Something inside her felt strangely calm, almost steady. She had been afraid for days, unsure of what the horse's past meant, unsure of who might come after him. But now, seeing the men and recognizing one of them as the worker from the neighboring ranch, she felt a strength she didn't expect. Everything that had been building was standing right in front of her. The man in the lead stopped a few feet from the fence. His clothes were wet from the rain, and his expression was tight, almost desperate. He said the horse belonged to them. He claimed the animal had been stolen before reaching their ranch and that they were only trying to take back what was theirs. But the daughter wasn't convinced. His voice shook too much, and the way he kept glancing at the corners of the property told her there was more to the story. Her father questioned him calmly, asking for paperwork or any proof at all. The man avoided answering. He grew impatient, shifting his weight, raising his voice. The daughter felt the dog at her feet growl low. It was the first clear signal that these men were not here for anything honest. The rain thickened, turning the dirt ground into soft mud. More ranch hands stepped out from the barn, forming a quiet line behind her father. No one carried anything threatening, but their presence alone shifted the air. The men who'd come for the horse kept glancing at each other, losing some of their nerve. The daughter noticed one of them backing away slowly, his hands raised. Another muttered that this wasn't worth the trouble. It became clear their plan relied on fear and secrecy, not on any real claim to the animal. Finally, the lead man said they were leaving, but warned that the matter wasn't over. Her father stepped forward and told them firmly that if they set foot on the property again, he'd involve the authorities. The men hesitated a moment longer, then turned and walked back into the night. The tension in the air didn't lift at once, but each step they took away from the ranch loosened something inside the daughter. When they finally disappeared beyond the fence line, she felt like she could breathe again. The ranch hands slowly returned to their tasks, though no one talked much. The storm softened until it became only a steady drizzle. The daughter turned toward the horse. He stood frozen, unsure if danger had truly passed. She approached the corral slowly, stopping when he raised his head in alarm. She spoke softly, telling him it was over, telling him no one would take him away. Her father joined her, both of them watching the horse steady his breath. They knew this wasn't the end of all their problems, but the worst moment was behind them. The horse lowered his head again. This time he didn't step back. Instead, he took a small step toward her. That night, after the storm faded and the ranch settled again, her father made a call to a friend in town, someone he trusted deeply. They needed to document everything properly. They needed to make sure the horse's identity was confirmed and protected. The neighbor who owned the ranch next door heard what happened too and came over early the next morning with old records. Together, they sorted through papers, vaccination logs, brand markings, and old auction records. Slowly, things started to add up. It turned out the horse wasn't stolen from the men who'd come demanding him. He had been illegally moved between several ranches in a shady trade situation. The men who showed up weren't rightful owners. They were part of a group trying to cover their tracks before the real authorities noticed missing animals. Their fear wasn't about losing a horse. It was about being exposed. When the daughter heard this, she understood why the horse had been so frightened of everyone at first. He'd been passed around, handled roughly, and pulled into things he didn't understand. But she also realized something else. Despite everything, he had survived. And for some reason, he had allowed her to be near him more than anyone else. Over the next few days, the ranch felt different, lighter. People talked freely again. The dog didn't pace at night anymore. The ranch hands joked while repairing fences and checking the animals. The daughter spent hours by the corral, letting the horse adjust at his own pace. He slowly grew more confident, more trusting. At one point, he even reached out and touched her hand with the tip of his nose. It was soft and quick, but it was real. She felt something shift inside her when he did it. It was the first step of a bond she hadn't expected to form. As the days passed, her father reminded her that a quiet ranch didn't mean a forgotten story. They still had to report everything. The sheriff visited, asked questions, and took notes. He promised he'd keep watch for any signs of the group who had come during the storm. He assured them the ranch did the right thing by standing firm. The daughter listened closely, feeling proud, but also humbled by how much responsibility came with protecting just one animal. By the end of the week, she fully understood why she'd fought so hard for the horse, even when she didn't know his past. Somewhere deep down, she sensed he needed more than shelter. He needed a place where fear wouldn't define him anymore. One afternoon, the clouds finally cleared. The sun warmed the ground, drying the last patches of mud. The daughter opened the corral gate, letting the horse wander into the larger fenced field for the first time. He stepped out slowly, then raised his head high as if testing the air for danger. Seeing none, he walked forward. Soon he broke into a smooth run. The sound of his hooves on the ground carried across the field. Her father joined her at the fence, both of them watching with quiet satisfaction. For the first time, the horse looked free. The daughter felt a kind of peace settle over her. The ranch felt safe again. The conflict that had been building for so long had finally reached its end. And though things weren't perfect, she knew they had done the right thing. She also knew the horse had found the only real home he had ever known. Later, as the sky turned gold with evening light, she brought a fresh bucket of water to the field. The horse walked up to her on his own. His steps were steady, not hesitant like before. She placed her hand on his neck gently. His skin was warm under her palm. For a moment they stood there together, quiet and still, two beings who had crossed paths by chance and ended up changing each other's lives. She whispered that he was safe now, and this time she believed it with her whole heart. The sun dipped behind the hills. The ranch lights glowed softly. Her father called her in for dinner. She turned to leave, but the horse took one small step after her, as if making sure she'd return. She smiled, finally feeling the weight of the past weeks lift from her shoulders. Everything had led to this gentle, peaceful end. The danger had passed, the truth had come out, and the ranch had returned to the calm life they valued so much. As she walked back to the house, the dry grass whispering under her boots, she felt grateful for the strange path that brought the horse into their world. What started as fear and mystery had become trust and healing, and even though the journey had been rough, it had given them a new beginning. She looked over her shoulder once more. The horse stood watching her, peaceful under the fading light. It felt like a promise, unspoken but understood. The story that began with shadows and uncertainty now ended with quiet freedom, and she knew the ranch would never be quite the same again.